Hey everyone, Mark here at the Wildlife Center at Refreshing Mountain. Wish I could be in person with you all at the Conservation School this year. It's one of my favorite events each year, but thankfully we're able to at least do some videos with you guys. Today we're going to be talking about native reptiles and amphibians and their conservation. It's something that I've always loved and have been working with reptiles since I was about 10 or 11 years old now, so sharing with people is one of my favorite things to do. And if you ever get a chance to come out to our Wildlife Center here at Refreshing Mountain, make sure you do so you can see all these exhibits and actually have some hands-on encounters with some of these animals as well. Starting out, we're going to talk about our American toad. You've all probably seen these before. If you're anything like I was as a kid, you're actually out in ponds and creeks catching these, especially in the springtime and early summer. One thing that a lot of people don't realize about American toads are their little poison glands right behind their eyes here. So they're actually poisonous. They're harmless to us if we're just touching them, but if you started chewing on a toad, I don't recommend you ever do that, by the way, they secrete these milky white toxins out of these glands. They're called bufotoxins, and there's a whole different variety of those depending on the species, and it'll make the animal that's trying to chew on them rather sick, or at least it tastes bad enough that they're going to spit the toad out and hopefully leave it alone, and hopefully learn not to eat a toad again. In some cases, it could actually be fatal to the animal if it's a small animal or depending on the species of toad. But in most cases, it's just going to be a bad experience for them. So, and in some cases, of course, animals are immune to their toxins, which is very important because with the food chain, there always has to be something that can eat the creatures, even if they're poisonous. So that's a very good thing. Skunks are an example of that. Hognose snakes, garter snakes, different things like that can all eat toads. Now, a little conservation note with these guys, there's lots of different toads in the world, but one of the most infamous toads is called the cane toad, which is originally from South America, and I believe they're even up into South Florida now, where they've been introduced. But they were purposely introduced to Australia. I believe this was back in the 70s. And it was not a good idea. So they introduced these cane toads to eat this bug off the cane sugar plants. And of course, as with most introductions, it didn't do that at all because these bugs are like 7 feet up on the cane sugar plant and the toad is all the way down on the ground. So you'd think they would have thought through that, but apparently they did not. Timber rattlesnakes rattling here, sorry. Anyway, what happened with the cane toads, they first of all are the biggest toad in the world. It's very huge, they're like this big. And all the native snakes and lizards and other animals that would eat toads in Australia, and they're immune to those native toad and frog toxins, are not immune to the toxins of the cane toad. So with that said, they are killing all the native wildlife because of these cane toads. There's over 1 billion cane toads in Australia right now. So it seems like a bit of an unsolvable issue over there. Thankfully, with our native Pennsylvania toads, we don't have those issues. But it's just a good example, along with hundreds of other examples, how introducing an animal into an environment where it was not meant to be originally, whether that introduction was intentional or unintentional, is never a good idea. And what's even worse is when we try to introduce an animal into an environment to take care of issues that have been caused by an introduction prior to that. So things like lanternflies and all that. Anytime people start talking about introducing some other bug to take care of those, I'm like, well, we probably don't want to do that. But that's just my personal opinion on it. So that's our little American toad, very well-fed toad, as you can see. Next creature, we got a spotted salamander. Beautiful little amphibian here. This one is actually special to me. We've had it in our collection for about 3 years now. And we have 4 spotted salamanders altogether, but I can tell exactly which one this is because of its one spot on its head that's just tilted a little bit to the right, and I know that this is the one that we've had for 3 years. That's what's so interesting about nature. Not only is there so much diversity in species and subspecies in general, and then in their different localities that they're found, there's also a lot of diversity in the individuals too. And I just think that's a really awesome thing. So you can also see that in humans, of course, which is a really special thing too. With these guys, and all amphibians, they have a lot of differences compared to reptiles. Usually I would be able to ask you those differences in person, but since we're doing the video, I'll just go over and touch on a few of those briefly here. The main difference being skin versus scales. Reptiles all have different variations of scales, right? Amphibians have this skin which is sometimes slimy. Newts and toads are kind of the exception to that. They usually have a rougher, more bumpy skin. So these guys have very absorbent skin. They can absorb moisture into that. They can breathe through their skin. There's some salamanders that are lungless. They, like the little redback salamanders that you find around here, they don't even have lungs. They are completely dependent on absorbing oxygen through membranes on their mouth and on their sides. Pretty fascinating little creatures. A lot of people don't realize that the eastern U.S., especially in the southern Appalachian Mountains down into the Smoky Mountains, is the biodiversity hotspot in the world for salamanders. There's more species down in the southern Appalachia of salamanders than anywhere else in the world. And that goes all the way up into Pennsylvania. We don't have quite as many species up here, but we have a lot. So really special that we have so many different salamander species found out here. And also with amphibians, they're what we call an indicator species. Very important to science because of their skin being able to absorb all of that oxygen and moisture. They can also absorb a lot of man-made toxins. So there's a wetland that they've been hiding in, and now all of a sudden all the salamanders are gone. Most people will be like, well, who cares? It's just a spotted salamander. They're everywhere. Well, that could be a good indicator that there's glyphosate or other toxins being just poured into that ecosystem that's coming off the salamanders. And what I always say is if the water's bad for the animals, eventually it's going to be bad for us too, right? And another thing that I like to say is to have a healthy and happy humanity, we have to have a healthy and happy environment around us too. We tend to kind of disconnect those things quite often. It's kind of the environment and humans when really it all works together in more ways than we can even imagine. So these guys are a very important part of that. Of course, another difference between reptiles and amphibians is their life cycle. The tadpole to adult frog transition, and reptiles simply don't do that. Reptiles either hatch out of an egg or give birth to live young. All right, these guys are a little squirmier. I'm gonna see if I can show you what I've got here. Woo. These are red-spotted newts. At this life stage, they're called the red-effed. The red-spotted newt is really interesting, and that they do the life cycle a little different. It's not just the larva stage to adult stage. These guys actually start out in an aquatic stage. I'm gonna put this one back. An aquatic stage, and then transition into this terrestrial stage, which they could be in for up to 3 years or longer, some scientists think. And then they go back to an aquatic stage as an adult. So they do it quite a bit differently than a lot of your amphibians out there would. And these are some of my favorite little amphibians. In captivity especially, it's a lot of fun to watch them hunt. They're little, we'll actually feed them fruit flies and watch them go around their exhibit and hunt and catch the fruit flies. They're really cute. They've always been one of my favorites. And when you see them out in the wild, even sometimes they're even oranger than this. It's just eye-catching when you get to see these guys out in the wild. So another native species that is very interesting to me, and I think their life cycle is very unique in that. The last one that I'm going to show you as far as the amphibians go, this is our gray tree frog. Yes, we have tree frogs in Pennsylvania. A lot of people would not think of that. Tree frogs are tropical species, of course, but we have several tree frogs. Even the little spring peepers are technically a tree frog, but the gray tree frog is kind of what I would consider a true tree frog. They're much more common in certain parts of Pennsylvania than others. I was just camping way out in western Pennsylvania up at Cook Forest State Park, and we heard gray tree frogs every night just calling out all over the place, and I loved being able to hear that. Around here, I don't typically hear that. Occasionally you will. It just depends on where you're at. And I love climbing trees. One thing I've always wanted to do is study these guys way up at the tops of the tree canopies, because as far as I know, there hasn't been a ton of work done with these guys actually in their native habitat, way up in the trees. Usually it's, oh, we found them 5 feet off the ground in a tree or in a bush, and or crossing the road on a rainy night. And that's usually where we learn about these guys. They are such cool little frogs. I'm gonna see if I can gently, there you go. Come here, buddy. Gently show you. Under his legs, they've also got a lot of yellow. You're probably not gonna be able to see this, but you've got to come to our wildlife center so I can show you what this actually looks like. Right under here, he actually has yellow on his legs. And again, you're not going to be able to see it probably, so I'm just going to try to show you on the back of his legs there. And if you can't see it, that's all right. Again, a very interesting characteristic of these guys. Sometimes they have green on their side. In fact, this one's really gray right now, but sometimes if he's sitting on his branch in there and we spray him down really good, get him really moist, he actually has green that shows up on his side as well. So one of my favorite amphibians here in PA, anything that climbs trees, whether it's a reptile or an amphibian, or a squirrel, for example, I just love, probably because I love climbing trees as well. So that's a little bit about our native amphibians that you can find here in Pennsylvania. And if you want to learn more about these guys, please come out and visit our wildlife center at some point. Thanks for watching, guys. Alright guys, next we're going to be talking about PA reptiles, which are my favorite. First, we've got some eastern black rat snakes here. Officially they're called eastern rat snakes, but we've always traditionally called them black rat snakes, so I call them black rat snakes still. This is one of our adults. These guys grow to be the longest species of snake in Pennsylvania. They can get to be over 7 feet long sometimes. And this over here is a little baby. This one was actually hatched down here. This is one of its parents here. So you can see as babies, they look much different than the adults. That happens a lot of times with snakes, that the juveniles have different colors or patterns and then transition into what they're gonna look like as an adult. So with these guys, there are two black snakes in Pennsylvania, the black racer and black rat snake. You can see there's some white patterns still here even in the adult that just slowly fades into adulthood. But black racers, the other black snake in PA, kind of starts out the same way. They've got little spots as a juvenile and then that slowly fades as an adult. The adults are typically much more solid black or gray color though, when they mature. Instead of with the black rat snake, you can still see some of that white intermixed there. Black racers are also usually a little less arboreal and they're much faster. So usually around on a hike, this is the snake you'll see on the path out in front of you, not the black racer, even though they can be equally as common in certain areas. And black racers are also much more naturally aggressive. Snakes are some of the most misunderstood animals in the world. We are always telling people that snakes only bite for 2 reasons. That's if they feel threatened or scared, or if they're going to eat something. They don't chase people typically or jump out of trees and eat people, things like that. People are pretty scared of snakes. And as we know with fear, it's usually based on misunderstandings, which is definitely true with snakes. So can you get bit by a snake? Do snakes bite? Absolutely. All snakes can bite because they have to bite to eat, but you're only going to get bit in almost every scenario if you're getting close enough to handle them, mess with them, or trying to kill them even. There's been more venomous snake bites than you could imagine that are the result of people trying to kill the snake, ironically, and then they get bit and are in the hospital for a week or two in the ICU. So don't mess with a snake, especially if you don't know if it's venomous or not. So those are our black rat snakes there. Alright guys, next we've got an eastern fence lizard. Pennsylvania's got some really cool little lizards. Again, some people don't even know there are lizards in Pennsylvania, but we have 4 species. There are 3 different species of skinks, and then 1 species of fence lizard. These guys are really neat. They get a little bit larger than this. They're usually found in rocky crag areas. For example, here in Lancaster County, you don't see these guys at all until you get down along the Susquehanna River, around some of the rocky crag areas around there, some of the rock climbing spots and things like that. What's neat about these is they're pretty dull on top, but the males, this is a female so she doesn't really have it, but the males on their bellies have a lot of bright blue on their neck and on their bellies, and as babies I've seen pictures of these even being more of a purple color, their whole body when they're first hatched out of the egg. They're quite small as hatchlings. Really cool little lizards. The 5-line skinks that we have are the other, one of the other more common species here in PA. And of course they have 5 lines down their back. That fades into adulthood with the males, and the males even get red heads during mating season as well. So it's interesting, kind of like with birds, sometimes with reptiles, lizards especially, the males will be much more brightly colored than the females. So that's our eastern fence lizard. We're going to show you a few more snakes here. My favorite snakes are venomous snakes, but my second favorite snakes, sorry, this one's very squirmy, are the very small non-venomous snakes. So the ones that not many people like to work with because they can be such a pain to care for and establish. This is a little ringneck snake. Many of you have probably seen these before. They're a pretty common native snake, but they can be a little tricky to care for. And you can't really exhibit them or anything like that in a zoo. But for me, they're some of my favorites. I love these little tiny snakes like red belly snakes, green snakes, things like that. So if it's not venomous, it's got to be small and tricky to take care of typically for it to be up on my favorite list of snakes. Or it's got to be brightly colored. I love green and blue snakes too. But I guess when it comes down to it, I like all snakes. So it's tricky when there's over almost 4,000 different species to choose from. Ringneck snakes, very pretty. They got that orange or sometimes yellowish or more of a reddish colored belly. Got that really cool little ring. So if you ever find a little black snake or a gray snake with a ring around its neck, that's exactly what it is, a ringneck snake. And again, a lot of people are scared of venomous snakes in the northeastern U.S., but you don't have to be. There's only 2 venomous snakes that you have to be worried about here in Pennsylvania. There's actually 3 species, but the one we'll talk about in the next segment here. And that's over 20 different types of snakes. So most times if you see a snake, it's completely harmless. That's our ringneck snake. I have 2 others to show you here. This eastern milk snake, really cool little guy. These get killed all the time because people think that they're the venomous northern copperhead. We have a copperhead on exhibit here. I'm not going to be able to bring it out today just because it's getting ready to shed its skin. But again, if you want a close-up look at a copperhead, come see us at the Wildlife Center so you can see that. Biggest differences are it's got a really small head, small blotches compared to a copperhead, and a thinner body. But number one rule in nature is if you don't know what something is, just leave it alone. And don't pick it up, don't lick it, don't smell it, don't do anything with it, just leave it alone. Again, most dangerous snake bites or venomous snake bites in North America happen from intentional interactions. People are picking them up or trying to kill them. These guys are harmless. They'll even eat baby copperheads sometimes. So really cool little snakes. When they're babies, again, they look a little different. They might have more of a maroonish red color where those brown blotches are now. Next, this guy's living up to his name, being covered in water. This is a northern water snake. These guys are naturally a pretty grumpy species of snake, so they like to bite a lot. If you want to get bit by a snake, just pick up a water snake and you'll probably get bit by it. This one's, which I don't recommend you do, of course. This guy's been in our, it's actually a girl, it's been in our collection for, again, probably 2.5 or 3 years. She actually eats rodents for us out in the wild. These guys eat almost entirely fish and frogs and tadpoles and things like that. Very good swimmers. These guys get mistaken for copperheads as well, where they don't look anything like them, but they do flatten their heads out to make them look triangular sometimes, which, of course, people say if it's got a triangular shaped head, it's venomous. We don't really go by any of those things here because there's plenty of non-venomous snakes that flatten their heads out to make them more triangular. So, again, if you don't know what it is, just stay away from it. Don't look at the eyeballs either. They say if it's got vertical pupils, it's venomous, round pupils, it's harmless. That is technically true in Pennsylvania, but it's not true in most of the other parts of the world. Okay, so in Australia, there's not a single venomous snake that has vertical pupils. They all have perfectly little round pupils like this guy. And you shouldn't be that close to the head to see the pupils of the snake if it could be venomous. Getting bit on the nose by a copperhead would be a really bad situation. And usually if you see a snake swimming in a pond or creek in Pennsylvania, it's this guy. We have no cottonmouths or water moccasins in the northeastern U.S. You hear stories about them all over the place, Maryland, Delaware, up into New England. They don't exist up here, okay? They're only in the southern United States. So usually it's a harmless northern water snake. They have very pretty belly patterns too, which most people don't realize. Alright, so everybody's favorite reptile in most scenarios are the box turtles. This is an eastern box turtle. These guys are protected. In fact, all native reptiles and amphibians in the state of Pennsylvania are protected to some extent or another. There's a small list on Fish and Boat's website of native species that you could keep if you have a fishing license, but you can only keep one individual. Those would be like garter snakes and painted turtles and things like that. But in general, we always say if you want to keep a pet reptile, just go to a specialized pet store or a professional breeder, something like that, and get your pet reptile that was bred in captivity for you to keep as a pet. The native ones are better to be left out in the wild. We have special permits here to keep all of our native species. With box turtles, very pretty. You can pick one up, take pictures of it if you see one out in the wild, but always make sure you put them back where you found them. It's fun with box turtles because they're very easy to tell if it's a male or a female. On the bottom of the shell for a male, they have a big indentation right here. If it's a female, it's completely flat on the bottom. So I always think that's kind of fun. As a kid, I always flipped them over right away to check if they were a male or a female. The other thing with box turtles, one of the reasons that turtles in general are protected is because it takes them very long to reproduce out in the wild. You gotta think a female box turtle might lay 10 or 12 eggs, right? And only 2 of those eggs end up hatching sometimes, and maybe only 1 of those babies make it to adulthood. That baby, it could take 10 years for them to make it to this size as an adult, or even a little longer, before they can then reproduce. So a lot of things can happen in 10 years. So you can imagine with habitat loss, overdevelopment, and making of developments in shopping centers and all that, and these guys having such a small home range, you can do a lot of damage to something as common as a box turtle in just a decade or two. That's why it's so important for some of these species to be protected even more so than others. And turtles are a great example of that. That's one of the reasons that the bog turtle there's such a big deal made out of the bog turtle, and they have even less eggs and reproduce even less times than maybe a box turtle would. And not to mention their habitat's even more specific, being in the wetland habitats, so they would be an example of an indicator species as well. That is our eastern box turtle. Alright guys, another thing with box turtles, male versus female, typically, again, kind of like with birds in most cases, the males are more brightly colored. This is a male, he's got a lot of orange on him. We've even found a male here on our property that the legs are like a red color, or almost pink. They're beautiful. The eyes are usually a little more of a bright red color, whereas the females are usually more yellow, and even their eyes are a little lighter. Now I've seen some examples that that's not fully true within the eyes, but in most cases, the eyes and the skin, the color on the scales is going to be brighter colored for males than with females, with box turtles. Alright guys, this is our timber rattlesnake. So in Pennsylvania, we have 3 different species of venomous snakes. Okay, stop rattling there. Usually once they calm down a little bit, they stop rattling. We have 3 different species of venomous snakes. We have the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, which is endangered. It's a small rattlesnake, and they're found out in the western part of the state. You'll probably never see one. They are an endangered species. So the 2 that you might encounter are the timber rattlesnake. These guys come in different color variants, and then the northern copperhead as well. Those are really the only 2 species that you have a chance of encountering if you're out hiking out in the woods. And even then, typically, venomous snake bites happen from intentional interactions. If you're trying to do this, but you don't have experience in how to do it safely, or you're trying to kill it. It does happen occasionally that people step on them or put their hand in the wrong place accidentally, but that doesn't happen nearly as common as the intentional interactions when it comes to venomous snakes. As far as rattlesnakes go, timber rattlesnakes, even compared to some of the western species, tend to be fairly relaxed. Their rattle is not only just a warning, but they're simply scared of you. They think that you're going to try to kill them. Venomous snakes have venom to hunt and kill prey. Defense is just a secondary thing. They use venom to defend themselves just like a harmless snake would bite, they would bite. And it happens to be that would be a serious medical emergency for us as humans. So, a little bit about venomous snake first aid. Here, we first of all, and being a facility like this, use professional handling techniques, as you can see with our snake hooks. And we also have professional snake bite protocols, access to anti-venom, consultant relationship with a hospital and toxicologist. Out in the wild, you're not going to have those things. So if you do accidentally step on a venomous snake in the wild and get bit, All that you do is get to a hospital as soon as you can. That's what you have to do. If it's a bad enough bite, you'll need anti-venom, and you're not going to find that out in the woods. So you try to stay calm, and you get to a hospital. Even if it's not a bad bite or you don't think there's been venom injected, you need to get there so that they can monitor the situation. Don't tie tourniquets around above the bite site. Don't try to suck the venom out. None of those things work or are effective. In some cases, they can cause more harm than good, actually. So really the only snake bite treatment out there for venomous snakes is get to a hospital, and if you need anti-venom, to get anti-venom. Timber rattlesnakes are far more toxic than northern copperheads, so usually a bite from a timber rattlesnake is going to be more serious than a bite from a northern copperhead. Alright guys, that's a little bit about our timber rattlesnakes.